bit easier. And for the county as a government and a large employer to lead by the power of our example. And we were talking earlier about how the county has done this repeatedly when it comes to inclusive bathrooms on the last bill, when it comes to a number of other areas. We have a lot of buildings, we have a lot of employees, and we can demonstrate what we'd like to see with the powers that we have looking inward as much as outward. And so I think that this is a really good example of that. And never has this been more of an important issue as we come out of this pandemic and all of the challenges facing working families and facing parents. So I'm just really excited to put this forward. I know all colleagues know what is in this bill, are supporting this bill. We have a number of issues that we're going to work through here strategically. I did want to acknowledge Ms. Wellens for all of her work and help, and also the executive branch. We've been working collaboratively, and I think we have largely worked through many of the issues and concerns that were raised, and I think ultimately we're going to come out of this meeting with a consensus to move forward and really make a difference for our workforce, help us recruit and retain the type of talent that our residents expect for county government. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Wellens. If you want to prepare us, we can walk through the packet, and then we can walk through some amendments, most of which are in the packet. There are a few that aren't, that have been working through up until the final minutes and moments here with the executive branch, but that either you can present, Ms. Wellens, or I can share, and you can clarify, whichever works best for you. So now I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Council members, are you able to hear me okay with the mask? Okay, thanks very much. So Bill 1022, Personnel and Human Resources Paid Parental Leave, the overall goal and outcome of this bill would be to provide county employees with 6 paid weeks of parental leave following the birth or placement of a child for adoption or foster care. And there's also an amendment to clarify that this benefit also would extend to the parents of a stillborn child. Just as a quick background, so as you all know, the General Assembly passed the Time to Care Act in the 2022 session. The purpose of that program was to create a state-managed insurance program through which eligible employees in Maryland will be able to recoup a portion of their salaries, capped at $1,000 a week for up to 12 weeks annually for certain family or medical leave that otherwise would be unpaid, and that includes parental leave to care for a new child. So I'm providing that context because this bill has 2 different sets of rules that would apply before the state law comes online and then after the state law comes online. So what the bill would do in the immediate term, because the state bill doesn't really become operational until 2025, in the immediate term, the bill would require the county to provide up to 240 paid hours of parental leave as to care for the newborn, newly adopted child, or newly placed foster child. The leave would run concurrently with federal FMLA leave, but it would not count against any other type of employee leave, such as sick or annual leave. In 2025, once the FAMLI, the state program, becomes operational, a new set of county provisions would take effect under the bill in order to coordinate the state and county programs. The county employee would continue to receive 240 hours of fully paid parental leave within a 12-month period, but the county would pay the portion of the employee's salary that was not already covered by the state benefit, the FAMLI benefit, which again is capped at the $1,000. So there would be a discrepancy in many cases between the employee's salary and the state benefit, and the county would cover the difference for 240 hours. In terms of and also just for a quick background, in terms of the current county law, under our personnel regulations, we do have a form of parental leave. It's 720 hours over 24 months to care for newborns, and other newly placed children, but it counts against your it counts against your other leave, so it's not an independent standalone benefit like this bill would provide. There are a few issues noted in the packet. The initial one was an amendment proposed by Councilmember Navarro regarding including the parents of stillborn children under the purview of the bill, and supported by the lead sponsor. This is on bottom of page 2, top of page 3 of the staff memorandum for your review. So again, this one would include, make sure that these benefits extend to the parents of stillborn children. So that's the first decision point noted in the packet, is whether the committees wish to adopt that amendment.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I just want to express appreciation. Councilmember Navarro immediately raised this issue. She and her team have really importantly identified what is a significant issue that is growing in awareness, I think, and that hasn't been as publicly discussed as it ought to be. And so I really appreciate her putting this forward. I strongly support the amendment. I wanted to turn over to her. She'd give a little bit of background on that. So, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Friedson. Absolutely. I want to thank my staff also as we were doing our discussion of the bill as proposed, et cetera. This is definitely something, as you said, that is just a lot of growing awareness on the impact on parents of stillborn babies, and how it is also quite important to extend this kind of benefit to parents who are obviously grieving and going through that particular process of adjusting and just really dealing with a devastating loss. There are a lot of obviously similar issues that parents have to go through as similar to what parents actually have babies. So I really do appreciate this. I think that is an area that is not often discussed, but as I said, has been growing in awareness, and a lot of articles and a lot of discussion about this as well to raise that kind of awareness. And so it is important for us to be leaders in this space, and I appreciate the inclusion of this in the packet. And I don't know if I need to move it formally or...
Unless there's any objection, I think we can take it without objection.
Okay, thank you.
Let's continue.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. The next two issues are really more providing context and background information. So issues number 2 and 3 provide some information about the upcoming Maryland program that will take effect in 2025, and also there's some context for you regarding what other jurisdictions in the federal government have done. The additional amendment that's presented in this packet, is in number 4 of the staff page number 4 and number 4, issue number 4 of the staff memorandum. And these are clarifying amendments to clarify the language of the bill so that it clearly states that the paid parental leave taken by county employees would not count against other types of leave, except for the FMLA leave, which is consistent with the state law, and that an employee must not be required to exhaust other leave prior to using the paid parental leave. So there are a series of small clarifications there on page 5 that comprise these two clarifying amendments for the committee's consideration. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. As noted on page 5, these are clarifying amendments that were suggested by Delegate Kelly, who was the lead sponsor of the state bill. It was understood that this would be how this would be handled, but there was some concern about the interpretation, and so this is really a belts and suspenders. I appreciate her putting that forward. We worked very closely with her in the crafting of this bill, and if there, unless there's any objection, then we can take these clarifying amendments without objection. Before we get to the other issue of the relationship between the state and the county, because I do have another amendment that I'm going to put forward in consultation with the executive branch, I just wanted to check to see if any colleagues had any questions on the background or anything about the other jurisdictions in the packet. Okay, so why don't we move to that. the issue that you've heard and that has been raised, it's a good problem, not a bad problem. And it was always the intention that this bill would be a minimum requirement, that we are going to provide every employee who works for the county with 6 full weeks of full pay in the event of a child, foster, birth, etc. There is an option in the family law, and as you heard from staff earlier, the Time to Care Act, there is an option that you can waive out if you provide more, if you have a better benefit. Essentially, the state bill is $1,000, so if you're a $52,000 salary employee, it's full pay. Our average pay in the county is a little bit over $82,000, I believe, at last analysis. And so it wouldn't cover your full salary. And so the idea was the county at minimum would just cover the balance to make sure that you are made whole so that you're actually getting the benefit of this leave. There is an opportunity for the county, which I hope that we will explore, to waive out of the state bill if there's an opportunity to do even more. But we want to make sure that we do at least 6 full weeks, and if we do and we're not doing more and we have an opportunity to have the state pay $1,000 of the cost, we should be taking advantage of that. So the goal here would be to not prohibit the county, which has never been the intention here, from pursuing that opportunity if it was feasible and if it makes sense. There's an interest among the executive branch to at least explore that opportunity, and we want to make sure that it's clear, as has been the intent, that this would not prohibit their exploration of that. So there's an amendment that we've worked with staff on. It couldn't quite make it into the packet, but it would be to amend lines 59 to 61, and it defines the state FAMLI program. And I share the challenge between FMLA and FAMLI that has, in the working on this bill, I have tripped up on that about 1.5 million times. But it would create, number one, the Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program required by the state of Maryland under the Time to Care Act of 2022, Chapter 48 of the 2022 Laws of Maryland as amended, or a private employer plan established by the county and approved by the Maryland Secretary of Labor under the Time to Care Act of 2022, Chapter 48 of the 2022 Laws of Maryland, as amended. And then after line 47, add the following new subsection A and re-letter the subsequent subsections. The requirements of subsection C of this section must not apply if the county establishes a private employer plan approved by the Maryland Secretary of Labor under the Time to Care Act of 2022, Chapter 48 of the 2022 Laws of Maryland as amended, and this plan established by the county under paragraph 1 of this subsection provides to each employee at least 240 hours of paid family leave annually. So the legalese, I think, speaks for itself, but the summary of it is as described. This sets the minimum standard that the county is establishing, and if there are other ways in order to do it, it would not preclude in any way this or any future executive branch from pursuing that. And frankly, I think it's always intended, 6 weeks is good, but for most families, it's not enough. And so we hope that this is the start of us doing more and more for our employees. So I would move that forward and for the consideration of colleagues.
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Okay. I think that is the balance of the issues on these sections related to the relationship between the state and the county. Great. So let's move on to the next discussion item, if there is any.
Thank you. That covers the discussion items that were contained in the packet. I should also note, and should have noted at the beginning, that we do have representatives from Human Resources, Commission for Women, Office of Management and Budget, and the representatives of FOP, IAFF, and McGeo also were invited to join should there be any questions from the committee.
Appreciate that. I think we're just about ready here. I have some questions on the fiscal note the fiscal impact statement, the 2.5 employees, and so if the executive branch could join, I just had a couple of questions about that. So the fiscal impact statement, which I appreciate, suggests that there are 2.5 additional employees to process this bill, to process the request for paid family leave. Some of it is the $160,000, for the one-time upfront cost, which, I don't know, but seems reasonable to me that there's going to be upfront setup costs. But could you explain that the 2.5 employees, seems like a high number. You already have to request for family leave. As we heard earlier, you don't get paid for it. But because of FMLA, you can take up to 720 hours, and you do have to formally request it as parental leave. And so it seems a little odd to me, frankly, that you would have to hire 2.5 new people for a system that we're just reimbursing people for something that they weren't previously reimbursed for a request that they were already making. So could you explain that to us?
Unfortunately, I'm Darrell Gorman, Acting Director for OHR. Unfortunately, our systems tend to be very difficult to manipulate, and oftentimes we run into problems where we have to do a lot of manual processes, and we're contemplating that initially this may be the case with this particular implementation. It may change over time, but as we begin this process, along with the other types of leave that we administer, this may pose some difficulty and would require additional FTE support.
Appreciate that. I gotta say, do you have anything else to add?
He's commenting from Corey Roloski with
Yeah.
OMB. He's
Yeah.
commenting directly from the OHR perspective.
Yeah.
This also relates to MC time and ERP, the finance associated rules, but getting the new leave code established in the system, getting the utilization of that, getting the management of that. And the point within the fiscal impact statement is to point out that whenever we do one of these things, it's an additional amount of resources that are required, and it can't be easily absorbed into the existing workforce. All the other projects that they're working on are still ongoing, and it's just an acknowledgement that there is additional workload on top of everything.
Yeah.
This may be term in a lot of these issues getting established.
I appreciate that. I mean, first of all, I think it's going to cost what it's going to cost, and if it's the right thing to do, and there's obviously overwhelming support for it, we just need to do it. I do think I very, very carefully read the fiscal impact statement, and the overwhelming amount of what is in the fiscal impact statement relates to what was just talked about, errors and manual fixes and changes, which speaks to a much broader issue on the system itself that really doesn't have anything to do with this bill. And so, I mean, it's troubling that a simple change in the coding would require 2.5 people permanently, full-time, to implement. I mean, we're not talking about 2.5 equivalents on a contractor for a temporary period of time, because it's above and beyond what the regular workload is. I just think the average voter and resident of Montgomery County who is reading this packet, it would be reasonable for them to conclude that either this is a spiking of a fiscal note to make it look like it's going to be much more expensive, or we have a really inefficient system that desperately needs to be fixed, because the idea of hiring 2.5 new people to implement just seems, I mean, the 160,000, again, seems reasonable. I've dealt with large state agencies with technology that, is old, that, it's bubblegum and Band-Aids to try to, change things. But, I just wanted to note that, and I'd hope that we could do a little bit more investigating into this, because it just seems a bit shocking that it would take 2.5 people to implement it.
The permanency of the positions is not intended to be automatic up front. That will always be resource driven. The point is not to inflate the initial cost of this, but simply to recognize that if we were to put this workload on the existing staff there, Either this would go or something else would come much later. In order to do this, along with everything else that's on their plate, additional resources up front would be required so that everything could happen in a timely fashion.
Yeah, and then the other question is the 160,000 is largely attributed to the interface between the family state system and the county's existing system, which state law has passed. We are a large employer. We would have to do that no matter what. And so that 160,000, which I don't dispute, I'm sure it has a cost, is not really attributed to this bill at all. So just to point that out, and if we're going to do something that's even more, we're going to have to make that change anyway. So I just I thought it was important to note that here because it is in the fiscal impact statement. I think if most folks who are looking at that would be a little bit alarmed by that, and I thought it was important that we flesh that out a little bit. I hope that we can take another look at the 2.5 positions to see if that really is necessary and whether or not that's really related to this bill or if it's related to challenge that we have in the broader OHR personnel system that needs to be improved from a technological standpoint. And then also the 160,000, which I think would have been a cost. It's a sunk cost. We have a sunk cost fallacy. We're paying that no matter what. Let's do the right thing. Let's do it right, and let's do it the way that we think it ought to be done. But I appreciate you fleshing that out. I have Council Vice President Glass who wanted to chime in here as well.
I appreciate the bill sponsor for vetting this out and talking about the cost, right? Either in operation, administration, just fulfilling the government service. And the reason I wanted to make a comment was because for this particular piece of legislation, there is a cost that the executive branch has associated with it, yet there are many other pieces of legislation, particularly HHS pieces that affect the workload of the Office of Human Rights, where we never have a cost associated with their work. Yet time and time again, Director Stowe comes to us and says, this is very important work. We want to do this. We want to continue supporting our residents and our workforce. Yet there is no staff. We need more staff. And I'm curious as to why there was a cost associated with this, but sometimes there's no cost associated with other pieces of legislation. I don't know who might be the best person to answer that, but I think that really might be the root of the question or concern.
I don't know that there's a permanent answer for that right here. I will say, back to Councilmember Friedson's point, the 2.5 was identified on a bill that was presented without an implementation plan. Once that plan is established, we'll be able to go back and figure out what is actually needed to get everything done. It may be 2.5, it may be 3.5, it may be 0.5, who knows? But when so much is unknown, and unfortunately with the way the state bill is and the fact that it's future dated, there's a lot of unknowns with that. So we're putting our best foot forward at the time we have.
And I understand and appreciate the candor, right? And you can't speak for what other agencies and departments, how they interact and what their thoughts are when testifying about legislation. But on the flip side, the other side of the coin is, expanding services is not free. There are costs associated with them. But how this particular cost was decided and how other pieces of legislation don't have costs associated with them is something that we should have further conversation about. I know my colleagues on HHS will say amen when we say, Department of Human Rights needs more staff, right? We just passed, the Joint Committee just passed a piece of legislation that would be under their purview, right? Or HHS as it is. But this is an ongoing conversation, and we need to find a time to talk about that too. So I yield back.
Appreciate that. And yeah, I think the concern is oftentimes it is associated the amount of money that an executive branch in any government, state, any county, anywhere, associates with something. If it's not consistent, it looks like you're valuing some over others, that you're putting up concern over some proposals versus others. And I think we got to get out of that concern, whether it's perception or whether it's reality, it's something that we have to have a better way of really analyzing it. And because, to Council Vice President Glass's point, that's true of any new requirement that is, placed, and whether it's a half position on a temporary basis or 2.5 positions on a full-time basis, that's always going to be determined as part of the implementation of a bill. But here it was more striking than it has been in most other cases. And so I think we do need to, understand, people actually read these things, and I think it makes, a difference. I hope there's a sensitivity towards that. But I want to turn to Chair Navarro. I know wanted to chime in on this as well.
Thank you. No, I think this is a very important conversation, and consistency is always key. I also want to make sure that our central office staff, notes those, these types of discrepancies in the packet, so that as council members, we're also flagging all of these issues. Vice President Glass, you're so much on target. The Office of Human Rights has traditionally been underfunded. Actually, the GO committee literally has forced additional funding onto them, because of course you get into this sort of catch-22 when it's budget time and you ask offices if they have enough capacity, and undoubtedly they say yes, I think we can handle it, because obviously they come before us with a particular target, budgetary target. And so it becomes, this kind of dance where you have to figure it out. But there is no doubt that we have passed so many bills that if we want them to be implemented, that capacity needs to be there, but it does have to be consistent, so I appreciate that. I actually had a question about the racial equity and social justice impact note. I don't know, I guess, I'm looking at the packet electronically, and I couldn't find it.
The last time I checked, it wasn't yet available. I did ask the office if it would be available before this work session. I didn't hear back, but I can check again to see if it will be available before the 26th.
Okay, well, once again, I think I want to raise that as a major concern and put that on the record. We did pass a particular law, and the law was very clear that we need to have these impact statements when we're deliberating on them, and this is the joint committee session, and it should have been done for us to consider. And so, I just really want to bring that forth, because it is all about how we as council members have the information necessary to make, informed decisions. And in terms of the racial equity and social justice law, and in terms of consistency with the economic impact statements, these things should not just be ad hoc. They need to be absolutely consistent if we are going to be implementing laws with fidelity. So I just want to register my frustration with that in particular. Thank you.
Thank you for raising that up. First of all, I neglected to mention it here. We did ask about it when the packet came out. I do appreciate staff requesting it for OLO, but it should be available for when we were taking up these items. The bill was introduced. It's had public hearings. It's been a month. So I think it's a really critical point that you have raised. I apologize for neglecting to raise it.
We actually built in capacity in order to get this done, which meant we did have additional staff to do this. So it's not as if we didn't, do our due diligence.
Absolutely. Thank you for lifting that up. And I apologize for not raising it myself, but we did notice it, and noticeably missing from the packet. With that, any other colleagues wish to speak? Ms. Wellens, any other items that you wanted to raise? I think we covered all the discussion points and amendments in the packet.
Correct. No other items. Thank you.
With that, is there a motion to approve the bill as amendment? Moved second. All in favor? Okay. Bill has been approved unanimously. We'll plan to take this up on the 26th at full council. I think we heard from the council president. Okay. Now we are on to our next item, Bill 1122. This bill is related to lactation rooms. It's similar in terms of the county government leading by the power of its example. Here, I did want to note, Ms. Ludine Green, all of your work here, working with my staff, and I should note Mary Geis on our team has been incredible on this bill and on the bill we just discussed. So I want to thank her for all of her work, and I want to thank the executive branch here in Department of General Services. We have been in conversation about these issues since February to try to get to a good outcome, a reasonable outcome. We came very close in the introduction. We'll have a couple clarifying amendments that we can raise here. We'll have Director Dice join us here at the dais. We're trying to balance what we can do as quickly as possible, but make sure we're providing an opportunity to actually get it done and not be unreasonable or unrealistic. There's been a differentiation between both having to identify all of the facilities, as we talked about earlier with the inclusive bathrooms. There's quite an inventory that we have in county government, and so we have to determine what is available and where and how we get it done. And then also separate out where we can get it done easily. Let's get it done quickly, and where it's going to take a little bit longer, let's separate that out. So we'll talk through that once we get to that discussion point in the packet. I'll just note here, this is a critical health issue. It's a major equity issue because the health of pregnant people and the health of young babies is in many ways connected to breastfeeding for those who wish to do it, and we should be making it as easy as possible to do it, particularly in county facilities that we control, that we own, that we rent. So that's really what this is about. We've taken steps to do that in recent years, including in this building, but I don't think as good and strong of steps as we could. And in working with a lot of the stakeholders, there is a clear understanding, including among county staff, that we could and should be doing more to really lead on these issues rather than following the tide, to really lead the wave. So with that, happy to turn it over to staff to take us through the packet, and look forward to having the discussion points. Before we get to that, I'll turn, to Chair Navarro.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Just to, again, thank you for this leadership, because as you noted, we had taken some steps, and in so many ways, I feel like this is just us keeping up with so many other countries where this is simply, something that is commonplace. But no doubt, as we were able to witness the issue with the formula shortage, I think it became real for many, many moms. And I think we have to do whatever we can to make this, a priority, and have this to be available. And there are always different experiences. I have two daughters. My oldest refused to breastfeed; she just wouldn't do it, and it was quite traumatizing for me. My second daughter was like, no problem, right? But this notion of there's so many things that come into place as a mom, especially first-time moms, et cetera, and to be able to to go to work and know that you have this opportunity to be able to continue to breastfeed, to pump, et cetera, it goes a long way. So I just think we're just kind of catching up. And once again, I will register my frustration that we don't seem to have a racial equity and social justice impact note for this as well. And I think it's paramount that we have those when it comes to full council as well, because again, we talk a lot about equity and the data, et cetera, but here we are, and we're not privy to that particular information here in that analysis. And again, the law was very specific about building the capacity of OLO, and we also have somebody who is in the central office here on the legislative side who is supposed to be working on this as well. So I just want to register my frustration, and hopefully this doesn't become a pattern. Thank you.
Seconded everything that you've just said. I really appreciate you raising that again here as well. And these are racial equity and social justice statements that I think are going to be ones that we want to be shouting from the mountaintops in terms of our very largely female and women of color workforce, which is a real strength of county government. And here we're supporting that workforce. And so we want the good ones and the not so good ones to be there. That's the whole point, and not the anecdotal. We know this is good, so maybe it's not quite as important. We need to have it for all of our statements. I do appreciate a lot of the support that we have gotten from community members that have specifically talked about the equity-related issues when it comes to access to breastfeeding facilities, particularly for working parents. So I do appreciate that, but we need, if we're going to have institutionalized processes, we need to make sure that they're consistent and they happen not, most of the time or usually, but always. I appreciate you raising that. Okay, with that, why don't we turn to you, and we can go through the packet, and we have the director of DGS here, Mr. Dice. Appreciate that to be able to work through a couple of the items that we've, I think, reached collaborative discussion and consensus on that we can work through with colleagues here today.
Thank you, Councilmember Friesen. Just to give a small context, the question is, why is this needed? And so the federal law, Affordable Care Act, did provide provisions or requirements for an employer to provide at least a space that is not a bathroom for an employee to express breast milk. Well, Bill 1122 will provide more than a space. It's actually providing a designated room that is sanitary, and there are other requirements that are also required. Not only that it's sanitary, but it's available, shielded from view, free from public or co-worker intrusion, displays appropriate signage, and contains the following: a chair, a flat surface to place a breast pump, a sink with running water, a small refrigerator, a microwave, at least one or more electrical outlets, and any other related supplies as provided in regulations. While noted already that there are some county buildings that do have an existing lactation room, but this bill would provide for consistency throughout all county buildings that are applicable. Further, the director of Department of General Services can determine that a room is unable to be repurposed as a lactation room, and if so, required to provide alternative accommodations. Alternative accommodations would include a mobile or portable lactation pod or station. In addition, the bill will provide for employees to be given a reasonable break time to express breast milk. As mentioned, federal law also provides this, but the Bill 1122 does not put a restriction for up to a year. It's as needed for the employee. With that being said, happy to just dive right into the scope of the county buildings that we are discussing for today.
Please.
And so page 5, according to the Office of Management and Budget, in coordination with DGS, it's identified over 400 facilities. My understanding of the 400 facilities, 300 would be impacted by this legislation. Of the 300, 100 are considered unfeasible for retrofits and would require the alternative accommodation. The remaining 200 is really what our discussion is here today. And so out of the 200, 170 are not near plumbing or adjacent plumbing to have a sink with running water. There is 30 that is near a sink with running water. And so I want to stop there as we start to talk about the fiscal note and what that would entail to get the 170 up to par with sink with running water. If I'm not mistaken, I think the fiscal note refers to over a $9 million investment over a 6-year period. But I will pause here just to give Executive Branch or Councilmember Friesen the opportunity.
Yeah, I'll just highlight, and then we'll turn to Director Dice, then I can note, I think, where we've, reached a level of consensus here. There's basically 3 categories, and I just want to note, included in the bill, if it's unfeasible, there are a number of different alternatives that are available that can be used. And so that's available here. And then we have the places where it wouldn't be that difficult to actually accommodate this with the running water and all of the recommended items as noted in the bill. The middle category is the question of what is reasonable to get to a place that we're actually accomplishing our goal here, because we don't want to fall short of what we actually think needs to be done, and what's a reasonable time frame in order to get that done. So I just want to note that for colleagues, that's kind of the 3 categories. Can be implemented relatively simply, maybe not easily, but simply, straightforwardly. What would be, is much more logistically challenging to implement, and probably by extension costly. And then the places where it wouldn't be feasible at all, and so an alternative accommodation, which the bill does allow, would be satisfied. So I just want to note that that's really the meat and the heart of this portion of the discussion. I'll turn to you, Director Dice, and then we can talk through where we, I hope have landed.
Okay, great. Again,
Judging by your comments, I'll determine whether or not we've landed there.
well, again, for purposes of the public, David Dice, Director, Department of General Services. I think I've got to start with three things. I first sort of became professionally aware of this. Personally, I've been aware of it since my 43-year-old son was born. But professionally, I was walking through an airport. I think it was either Logan or Hartsfield a number of years ago, and noticed a portable lactation pod. And I thought to myself, well, that's odd. And looked into this. This is a couple of years ago. Came back and actually started to talk to staff. Can we do this? This sounds like a pretty good idea. It never got off the ground, budgets being what they are and all. But so so that's number one, my personal words. Number two, we want to do this, and we want to find a way to do this. But number three, as was just outlined, it would be an absolute miracle if all of these round numbers were absolutely accurate. They're not, of course. They're just estimates. And we don't know, frankly, what we don't know. And so one of the things you'll see in the comments that we offered was that we need time to know so that we can make a more accurate determination as to where each of these buildings fall. And as I've talked with council staff and Mr. Friedson's staff, that we would target probably at first the buildings most likely to have a need. But to be honest, even those that are excluded from the bill, like warehouses and things like that, I've run warehouses with staffed by persons who would reasonably require a lactation accommodation. So we don't know, but just trying to logistically target how best to approach this, we would likely approach this with the buildings most likely to have persons who would need use of these facilities, which would be our higher occupancy buildings. Having said that, one of the impacts, lasting impacts of COVID that's focused on telework is that most of those high occupancy buildings are not highly occupied. And so do provide for spaces, a room in each building that we could likely target for this. And again, you guys have read our statements. Our biggest concern is the plumbing requirement. If the plumbing requirement didn't exist, I could have people out there doing this right now. It's tables, chairs, electrical outlets, and an inside lock. And I got all the people and all the stuff to do that. Like everyone else, I'm resource challenged, and there's no resource allocation in the fiscal impact for DGS, but a lot of this is stuff that is just not hard to do. The challenge, again, becomes on the plumbing aspect. And again, it's not the water. I can run water anywhere. It's the drain, waste, and vent system. Water is pressurized, and I can make it go up, down, and sideways. But gases go up, and liquids go down. And so the challenge becomes the waste and vent plumbing, and therefore the proximity to existing drain, waste, vent, or DWV that we call in the industry. So that's the real challenge, and hence the emphasis on access, reasonable access to nearby plumbing. I identify it as a restroom or kitchenette on the same floor. And again, I'll take the EOB for example. I know of 3 floors on the EOB that have kitchens and kitchenettes. One of those floors would likely be the target that we would have for finding and identifying and reserving a room as a lactation station. And I tell the affected director that congratulations, you've joined the lactation team and I'm taking one of your rooms. In one of those cases, I happen to be that director, so I'll make sure I pick on someone else. But anyway, this is doable. We just need time to look at our buildings and see which ones help us get this done as fast as possible.
Appreciate that. All right, I'm going to summarize what I think is a reasonable accommodation to address those issues which we have discussed, to see if colleagues are willing and interested. So the first is all new and major construction will have all required materials as in the bill, which
Already done.
no disagreement there.
We
I
lead
just
by
wanna-
example.
Just want to summarize. All buildings where it is feasible to have sinks with running water will have sinks with running water, right? Where it's feasible. The 30 that we talked about, that's feasible.
Yeah, it's again, and that's an estimate. If I can, you want to comment first, or want me to do a running comment?
Sure. Well, why don't I go through and you
Okay,
can, yeah, sure.
Thank you. You said it was the running water was not the problem, it's the
Drain
drainage.
waste vent, yeah.
So it can't just say running water.
It's
Yeah,
associated.
access to a sink. I mean, the
It's
bill
the-
refers to it as, I'll let.
But if the running water is not the
Yeah.
problem, then we need to figure out
Yeah.
what is the
It's the
problem.
waste from the
So it's
sink.
got to say what it is.
And correct me, because I'm not the the contractor or the engineer here, but my understanding is access, at least to some type of plumbing, is necessary for the best practice of washing the pressure pump device and having access for sanitary reasons. And so, if worded properly, it would be reasonable access nearby to plumbing, which could include a kitchenette.
It does, right.
Yes.
Yeah,
And so-
plumbing typically would include both the supply and the waste.
Okay.
So a sink assumes water supply and water release, water draining.
Okay, all others would have access, nearby access to water plus pipes, so plus plumbing. I mean, we
Plumbing
can-
system,
We can wordsmith this
So
up.
a
I'm just trying
plumbing
to get.
system is adequate.
I think
language.
I don't want to get caught up on the language. We can deal with the language second, but let's just make sure everyone's on the same page and see if there are any questions of colleagues about the specifics. You would have 6 months, so 3 months after the passage, or excuse me, 6 months after passage, but 3 months from the effective date. So the language in the bill would be 90 days, but which would be 6 months for the purposes of the timing that you would have, just so we're on the same
To do my assessment.
page here, to do an assessment of all county facilities to determine what is needed, because understandably, you don't have that information,
Correct.
available right now. 12 months to complete space in the highest occupancy building, so that would be 9 months, 270 days after the effective date. And this would be, there's approximately 30 of the highest occupancy buildings. This would cover the largest proportion of county employees. And so we'd be making a big step forward, and we'd be doing this within a year.
Right, and the understanding that the outcome of which could be any one of these three options.
Sure, yeah, anything that satisfies the
Wall plumbing,
requirements of the
nearby
bill.
plumbing, or a pod.
Correct, but you'd have a year to implement.
Yeah, okay. Those high occupancy facilities, sure.
Okay, and then all other buildings, you'd have 24 months, 2 years to satisfy this in all county buildings, which would be 21 months after enactment of effective date of the bill, which would be, because it takes 3 months to, from passage to effective date, that would be 2 years.
Right, we had envisioned this from the first reading of the draft legislation to be approached like many of our level of effort projects. I have a need, I break it down prioritization, and I hit it in successive fiscal years. In this case, it would have a definitive end of 3 years, and then we're done. Sure, we can do that.
Okay, and then progress reporting, because you have the report that you have to do 3 months after the effective date. So you'd have 6 months to issue the report to tell us, the council would then be aware of what are we dealing with here.
Right,
So
and
that when you
6
come and meet with us, a government operations committee or otherwise, we can say, how's it going? I have a list
Right.
here that has 400 buildings. We know what category each building is. How are we doing in each category?
Yes, that was our intent. After the survey, we develop a report that says, here's all the buildings, here's what we'll do, here's the schedule we propose to do it in.
Okay.
Sure.
So we have concurrence here that this is, reasonable. I'll get to you in a second. And just from council side, I just want to make sure we're on the same page, that I've explained what you believe I was supposed to be explaining.
Yes, Councilmember Friesen, that's correct.
Okay,
The
perfect.
staggered terms of implementation for each part, yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to turn to colleagues now. We'll start with Councilmember Rice.
Just very quickly along those lines, since we're promising dates, I know that we've experienced tremendous problems when it came to standing up the Ignite Hub at Montgomery College, just with supply. And so I'm concerned about supply chain issues and that not affecting dates. I just want to make sure we're not over-promising and under-delivering.
No, that's an informed and intelligent question, frankly. Supply chains are problems everywhere. We've actually spoken with some of the suppliers of the pods, which would be the biggest supply chain challenge, and they've reported to us that it's not a problem. I'll look for a nod from my deputy, Jamie Cook, who has spoken with some of the suppliers. Is that correct? 4 to 6 weeks. So that's pretty good. As opposed to rooftop air conditioning units, which are running 42 weeks. But anyway, so yes, we don't anticipate a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that question. Council President Albernas.
Thanks. Wasn't sure quite where to add this comment, and it's more of a general comment, but this is such a critical and important step, especially with where we are in the world right now. And I think this sends the message to the region that we are a family-friendly government in every way imaginable. And this is going to help both improve the working conditions and standards for current employees. I think it's going to help with recruitment and retention, frankly, and help in so many other ways. But it's all predicated on making sure that management is a strong partner here and creates an environment, in addition to having this literal space and time, that there is flexibility given, that there is a long enough runway given. And having managed in county government for 12 years, we have excellent managers in county government, but there are times where some managers interpret policies differently than maybe others. And so we have to set the tone, in addition to creating legislation and ensuring that we have resources available in both practice as well as policy, in making these accommodations available, and that it's welcomed and encouraged among various departments and agencies. So I know I'm looking at my colleagues in human resources who I know this all too well, but it's important for department heads to spread this message too. And we in the council need to take leadership on this as well. So it's just a general comment, but I think related to everything we're talking about here.
If I can speak to that, though, as the council president will recall, when he was in the executive branch, General Services is known as a department that gets stuff done, and I seldom am inhibited by reluctant department heads. So it's my experience, though, not to characterize department heads in the executive branch poorly. I think there is a wide acceptance for this. It really does come down to the nuts and bolts of the space that we ultimately determine to be the one that we want to use. And we'll have those discussions one-on-one, but the force of the legislation will actually help us move forward with this. So I think you help us in achieving those goals by passing this.
Well, thank you for that. And I think, boy, do we need to demonstrate that Montgomery County government is family-friendly. Family-friendly for our employees and family-friendly for the people that those employees are serving. We should make it as easy as possible for families to access the services that they desperately need. And quite frankly, as we saw during the pandemic and tried to adjust and reboot and rethink and reimagine, we've got work to do, like every other service provider, and there are no more important services than the ones that we provide as a county government to our residents. So any other questions, comments from colleagues? I'm seeing some consensus on the consensus, which is good. I'll just summarize. All new buildings and major construction will have the required materials in the bill. All buildings where it's feasible to have sinks with running water or plumbing as defined will. All others must have nearby access to water plus plumbing, running water plus plumbing. 6 months, which would be 3 months after the effective date, to do the survey of existing buildings that you'll be reporting back to the council under that same time frame of what that inventory looks like. 12 months to complete space in the highest occupancy buildings, the 30 highest occupancy buildings. So that would be 9 months after the effective date. And then all other buildings, 21 months after the effective date. So 24 months, 2 years. Okay. All right. So with that, we will allow our crackerjack council staff team to put that into language. But that is the recommendation. I think without objection, we'll.
What about the door locks?
And so this.
Yeah, so we still have a few other items. Yeah,
Yes.
we're not approving the bill. I just wanted to approve. This is really focused on the implementation schedule. So in the packet, we're in the fiscal impact, because that was really speaking most of the implementation. But thank you for raising that. Okay, so we're good on that, on the implementation. Appreciate again the coordination and collaboration starting back in February of the Department of General Services in particular. And with that, I'll turn back to you, and we can continue going through the packet.
Thank you, Councilor Friesen. And so we'll move on to number 4, referring to the reasonable break time. I wanted to make a suggestion here for the council to amend lines 49 to 51, just because the federal and state laws both require an employer to provide reasonable break time, but that break time doesn't have to correspond with the lunch or already scheduled breaks. And so I wanted to clarify to amend lines 41 to 51 by striking that provision. The break time is still available in Section A. An employee must be provided reasonable break time during the workday to accommodate the need for lactation, but specifying when that break time needs to have could be considered more restrictive or in conflict with federal law. And so for those reasons, I'd recommend striking that. And this is a two-part. The recommendation is to also to clarify that compensation would not be required to be given to an employee that takes that break time under subsection A. And so the break time that they already are provided under Montgomery County Personal Regulations is what an employee would be given.
Yeah, very much appreciate this. The goal originally, just for colleagues to understand, the goal originally of concurrently, we were trying to be flexible. It seems that the language was, unintentionally less flexible. So I agree and appreciate this. And if there is no objection from colleagues, we could move those clarifying amendments. And I think this speaks to the heart of what Council President Albornoz was talking about. This isn't just about facilities. This is about management working collaboratively with their teams to be as flexible and reasonable as possible so that we can be accommodating. Because we have lots of employees with lots of different needs, and we need to make sure that we're meeting their needs so they can meet the needs of residents. So appreciate that. I think without objection, we can accept those.
Okay. Our last amendment, just number 5, is another clarifying amendment, and wanted to emphasize that although it may be implied, using the terminology, the lactation room must be free from public or co-worker intrusion is not sufficient. We need to actually have language that says a door lock is required. And so the recommendation here is whether the committee would consider amending line 14 that would include that the lactation room has a door lock from inside. And so if that is acceptable, then
I'll turn to Councilmember Katz.
Thank you, Mr. Well, I don't know what your official title would be on this, acting chair, I guess.
I'm afraid to know what you would call me. So
that was not my initial
just,
thought, however. My only concern is, what is a door lock? Is a latch a door lock? Is that considered a door lock?
yes, Councilman.
So,
Yes. So a
'cause
latch.
to me, they're safer than the door locks we have now, on the doors, so, yeah. Okay.
Is the recommendation to have latch as a terminology as opposed to?
Or it could say door lock or latch
Or
or
latch.
whatever.
That's fine.
Yeah. And I'd be fine with that. Thanks.
I'll turn to Councilmember Rice.
Could we just say could be secured or locked from the inside? which then allows for there's no specific terminology.
That would be
It
our
could-
preference.
There you go.
Yeah.
Secured from the inside.
Okay.
All right, so number 3 on the suggested amendment under number 5, which is amending line 14 on page 8 of the packet, just so everybody understands. Number 3, rather than has a door lock from the inside, it would say can be locked or secured from the inside. Okay, without objection, we'll move the amended amendment with that. Okay, I have one other item that I just wanted to raise. I really think it's important, and I'll yield to colleagues of whether we should include this in the bill or whether we should request it or what the case is. But we have been in conversation with OHR and with TEBS about the development of an online lactation room locator and scheduling mechanism. I think this would be really helpful both for employees and for visitors of county buildings. I know we're putting a lot of requirements on the executive branch here, and so I want to be sensitive to that, but I ultimately think that if we're going to go through all of the trouble of doing this for a really important reason, that we don't want it to be a tree that falls in the forest with no one there to hear it, or in other words, a lactation room that we spent a lot of money and effort and resources to build that no one knows is there for them to use. And so I really think that this is important. There are a lot of employees that go building to building, and so for me, I know exactly where everything is near my office and near this near this room. But for many of our staff members, they're going to dozens of buildings in the course of their regular business, and the likelihood that they would know exactly where all these facilities might be would be limited. So I'm happy to amend it to include that. I'm also happy to request it and have further discussion. I'm yielding to the will of the body here to provide a broader time frame because there's some technology piece here, but I think we absolutely have to do this, and I'm open to exactly how we do it. But I think this exercise won't reach what we hope it will do and all the conversations that we've had unless we have something like this in place. And with that, I'll turn to you, Councilmember Rice.
Well, Councilmember Friedson, it's great that this council has been so supportive of our Ignite Hub, because our Ignite Hub is exactly situated to do things just like this. So I would ask Kimberly Ricone, who is in charge of our Ignite Hub, if they would take on this task of designing. That's what they do, with coding and designing apps to solve real-world problems. It is something that I think that they would be very happy to take on, and would be something that would be at no expense to the county. And so it's a win-win for us all around, utilizing something that we've already invested great resources in, but still gets us to where we need to be and addresses the concern that you have. I couldn't agree with you more that I think that it's appropriate. And in light of some of the apps that I've seen that have been made through our Montgomery Can Code program and others, this would be one that would easily be produced within probably a 6-month time frame at most.
Councilor Navarro.
I do agree that I think there should be some reference made in the bill regarding this, and then through regulation, something like this, having the Ignite Hub take it on, I think would be awesome. It's a really, initial project of sorts. But I do think it would be important to include it in the legislation, to make reference to that as a requirement and have it specifically, sorted out through regulation.
So, first of all, I think it's a great idea to utilize, again, utilizing what we've already invested in, and we've already worked to capacity build in order to do exactly the types of things we're talking about. I appreciate Chair Navarro, because I agree, and I'm glad that you said that. I think it is important to include in the bill, perhaps we could work with the executive branch on language that would allow for what has been requested here to work with the Ignite Hub, so that it doesn't have to be too stringent. And I actually personally think, with all due respect to everybody, an app, even better than the county website, in terms of ability to be utilized. I think if it's separate from the county interface, it might even be a little bit easier to navigate for residents and, to be able to, for us to implement. So I really appreciate that, and we won't agree on exact language here, but I think we can move forward that we will have language, and maybe we could share it with the joint committee members, and we can just have a consensus before it goes on the 26th.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it would be important to engage, TEBS, given that technology is under GEO, et cetera. I think it would be good for them to be involved and figure out how this could interface and if there are any issues that need to be worked out. So that's why I thought it would be important to have sort of general language that refers to this in the bill, but then through regulation, include engaging TEBS, including everybody figuring out what would be the best process, if it's going to be an app, if it's going to be Ignite Hub, are there any legal issues or whatever that need to be sorted out, but they can do that. So I think for the full council, it's just language would really be our attorney language that that makes this as a requirement in the bill, and then through regulation, the specifics can be then worked out.
I appreciate that. So perhaps it could be a reporting. We have a lot of reporting requirements in this, and so perhaps we can have an additional reporting requirement, on that with a similar, timeline, so that, this could be referenced in that way. But I think we can yield to council staff to come up with that language and share with us.
Agreed. I think that's the best thing to come back, just because we're thinking it through, as we go, and which is definitely a great idea. But one of the things I want to look at is that the executive is required to come up with a policy at minimum, and one of the part of the policy is the availability of a lactation room. And so a part of that, not only the availability, but the location of that, and then we can tie that into the app as a separate provision. So I think that's
a good idea.
option.
The communication. I mean, I think it related, if we include language in there about the plan to communicate with employees and visitors in county buildings of the availability and location of I think that would potentially cover it, but I think that's a great idea. Okay, all right. I'm seeing nodding in the back from the executive branch. I'm seeing nodding here on the dais from council colleagues. So excited and really pleased about that. Ms. Ladine Green, do you have any other items of discussion that we haven't gotten to?
No, that concludes our discussion for today.
Can I just ask one clarifying question? Just looking at the bill. This is to require county buildings to include a lactation room for county employees, not the general public. I just want to make sure, because almost every space that I'm going to identify is going to be behind secure doors.
Well, I think it's a good point. What I was referencing is we have people that come behind secure doors who are coming to meet, we're not just employees,
right, yeah.
that are coming to meetings, that they are coming. I mean,
But this is not an accommodation to the general public.
It was not intended to be a public accommodation. It was intended to be a workforce issue. When I was referencing visitors, and I apologize for I separate visitors from members of the public. Members of the public in a public event versus a visitor who is coming to meet. Could be a contractor, could be some type of partner. Oftentimes they are meeting behind those doors.
Which is why I thought that it was going to be important to have TEBS involved and et cetera, just to look at all the parameters and the legal issues and things like that, which is going to be easily done.
Absolutely. Good point. Okay, thank you. I was curious as to what the clarifying question to snatch conflict from the jaws of consensus. But good news is we're clarifying consensus from the grip of consensus, which is good. Okay, with that, do we want to move the amended bill? Moved by Councilmember Katz, seconded by Chair Navarro. All in favor? It's unanimous. Terrific. I think this is, I'm told by the council president, also going to be likely on the agenda along with the prior bill for the 26th. Really appreciate everybody's work on this. I know it was complicated and a lot of moving parts, and so I really appreciate that. And I think with that, I'll yield back to the co-chair to close us out.
Nope, I think that this has been great work. I appreciate everybody who has worked so hard on all of this, and my colleagues as well. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
You got this.
You're there for them.
We're here for you. Find free care guides at aarp.org/caregiving.
150 over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
Your blood pressure numbers could change your life. Lowering them could save you from having a stroke. If you've stopped your treatment plan, restart it or talk to your doctor about creating one that works better for you. Start taking the right steps at manageyourbp.org.
Now I'm, trying to get better, stronger than ever.